you can see from the title on the screen and the notes going round, we're going to spend the next session, about an hour and 20 minutes, looking at faith and salvation. Before we do that, there's a few things I want to talk about just to kind of set this session up and give you an idea of where we're heading. The first thing to say is, because I'm an administrator, you can rest assured that wherever we are in my talk, we will be finishing on time. It doesn't necessarily mean we will have finished the talk and got through the notes, although that is my intention. But we certainly will be finishing at, was it 3:30 we finish? Yes. 3:30. So I will finish on time. The other thing I want to say, which I hope is obvious from what you've got to know of us as a team over these few days, and I hope anyway it's obvious, but I want to say it because I think it's important. I am talking to myself as much as I'm talking to all of you when I give this session. As Ross said, this is a subject that I've kind of journeyed with, and I've been on a journey about, but it's certainly not something that I am completely on. It's not. I am saved. Don't worry about that before you start to panic. But for all of us, as I'm sure you probably already knew, but if not, you are probably discovering. A relationship with Jesus is a lifelong journey, and there's always stuff to learn. There's always more wholeness that we can grow in, and more things that we can receive from God. So please don't think I'm standing here as someone who has everything sorted. I have learnt some things along the way, and hopefully I want to be able to impart that to you during this session. But please do know that I still struggle with things. I don't have all the answers. But let's look at this together. So, as I said, we're going to talk about faith and salvation. You'll probably gather, if you've looked at your curriculum, or you'll certainly gather during the course of the year, that I intentionally don't teach quite as much on DNA as most of the rest of the team. There's a few reasons for that. One is purely a time thing. My main role on DNA is as administrator, so you've probably already noticed on this week that a lot of what I do is in the background, behind the scenes, that sort of thing. So it's not my main role and my main focus. The other thing is, as you'll have already experienced, some of the rest of the DNA team are fantastically gifted at what they do. And so rightly, a lot of the sessions are taken by them because that's part of their passion and their calling and their gifting. But as you'll see on your timetable, sporadically across the year. So I do some sessions, and it's fair to say I love this element of my job.
Anyway, yeah, so as I was saying, I don't do many of these sessions because clearly I don't actually know what I'm doing and can't even use a microphone. But when I do, I love it. I love the teaching element, but I also really enjoy the fact that it's just an opportunity to spend time with you as a group and just impart a bit to yourselves, and also to kind of interact with you and have questions and stuff. So please do interrupt me at any point if you've got any questions as we go through this session. You'll have probably noticed that obviously faith and salvation are two different things, and they are also two huge topics. So what we thought we'd do is we'd try and combine them into one and just cover it in one session. So there's a lot you could talk about when talking about faith or salvation. So if you want to try and talk about both of them, you could literally spend a whole day on this topic. The reason that we try and combine these together is, as I hope you'll see as we go through this session, I believe that actually in many ways you can't really separate the two. So obviously faith is one thing and salvation is another, but as you'll see as we go through the session, they will kind of interlink and interweave, and actually they're intentionally combined together in a session because I don't think you can just separate them. You've got your notes. At this stage, please don't kind of flick through them all because it will kind of give away some of where we're going. So when I come to the different points, do take notes as you go along, but don't kind of flick ahead and see where we're going because it will give away some of the answers. What I thought I'd like to do just to kind of set the scene for this topic of faith and salvation is just very briefly tell you a bit about my own story, and then we're going to dive into the notes, because I think a lot of the journey God's brought me on kind of really relates to this stuff, and then we can kind of unpack some of those different elements. So I grew up in a town called Billericay in Essex, so I lived there until I went to university at the age of 18. Both of my parents were Christians. My brother was at the time, so we all went to church. So I've literally spent my whole life in church, to be honest. I've never not been to church. And growing up, obviously to start with, I very much went to church because my parents did, and I was in all the Sunday school and the youth groups and that sort of thing. And then when I got to about the age of 13, the youth groups at my church changed at that age group. So instead of being part of the morning service, there was an evening sort of youth group that happened after the evening service. So for the first time, to kind of be part of that, you didn't have to physically be at church because it was kind of later. It still happened in the same building, but it wasn't attached to the service as such. So when I got to 13, my parents obviously said to me, it's your choice, kind of you're getting older. We'll still be going to church on a Sunday morning. Obviously we'd love you to come, but it's up to you. And at that time, I was, and still very much am, into football, and particularly playing football. And for those of you that play football, or any sport probably, you'll probably know that most of the leagues and the competitive elements of sport happen particularly at a weekend and often on a Sunday morning. So when I was growing up, sort of from about the age of 11, most of my mates would play for a Sunday morning football team. And for the first couple of years, I wasn't able to play because I was going to church. So when I got to 13, I decided that actually I'd rather play football than go to church. So I sort of started playing football on a Sunday morning, but in the evening still went to the youth group because actually I really loved the group, mainly because of the people there. So I'd made some really good friends. There were just a lot of good things they kind of did during the group. It was a lot of fun. And then probably about once a month, I would also go to church before the youth group. To be completely honest, only to please my parents, really. So obviously every Sunday, my mum and dad would kind of ask, do you want to go to church in the evening? They would often go to the evening service, either as well as or instead of the morning. And so they would say, do you want to come along? And most Sundays I'd make my excuses and say, no, not really, not really up for it, and just come for the youth group afterwards. But about once a month, to appease my parents, I went along. And so for me, kind of all of that journey up until that point, as much as I enjoyed it, and I obviously knew kind of all the Bible stories, and I'd been taught a lot about God, for me, my faith was very much my parents' faith, really. And that's not something that was a problem. Like, that's a really precious gift, and actually who I am today is very much because of that background and that inheritance. But it was very much kind of lived out through my parents, I guess, and in a really positive and healthy way, in the sense that throughout my life they've always wanted me to have my own faith and to make my own commitments. So I grew up in a Methodist church. I don't know how much you know about Methodist churches, but the sort of common way of doing things is if you have a child, you normally get that child christened, it's called in the Methodist church, or baptised. So as a baby, I was baptised, so sprinkled with water and the service and all that sort of thing. But for my parents, that was very much, we are doing this on your behalf as a sign to God, and also with the expectation that when you are older, you will then decide for yourself whether you want to carry on in this faith. So my parents did that in a really good and healthy way. There are all sorts of different views on baptism, which I'm sure you may or may not be aware of. I'm not going to go into any of those now because it's a big can of worms. But as I say, my childhood very much was living out my parents' faith. And then when I got to about 15, I was your typical teenage guy, so very much into sport, very much still playing football on a Sunday morning, that sort of thing. And then one Sunday morning, my dad came home from church really excited, really wanted to tell me something. I was like, what's going on? And he's like, I've just met the new youth worker. And there's this guy that's come in, he's going to be a new youth worker. And I think you're just going to love him. He's fantastic. I was like, oh, right, yeah, why is that? And he said, well, he loves football. Tick, I love football. And he's a West Ham fan. I was like, brilliant, I'm a West Ham fan, even better. And he was just a really normal guy, very down to earth, had a really easygoing way of kind of explaining the Christian faith, and very much focused on Jesus and a relationship rather than kind of rules and rituals and regulations. So my dad was very correct that I really did get on with this youth worker, really clicked with him. And for me, when I was about 15, that was probably the first time where I started to explore Christianity, because I kind of wanted to and I was a bit interested, that sort of thing. And so I went to a Christian event called Soul Survivor, which I imagine most of you have probably heard of now. And interestingly enough, actually looking back on it, so a few of my friends became Christians that week, like a few of our youth group. And most kind of evenings, I was starting to kind of feel that prompting of, you know, I need to make this commitment for myself. I need to give my life to Jesus. And I kind of kept pushing it away and be like, no, it's fine, you know, I'm not quite ready. And then on the last night, when I was going to sleep in my tent, I kind of made this promise, I guess, to God, that if there was an altar call tomorrow, I was going to go up. Like, this was my moment, this was my time. And just by chance, on the Friday, I think it was a Friday at Soul Survivor, on the last day, because it's only the morning, they do things slightly differently. And instead of doing like an altar call and who wants to become a Christian, they actually just finished with communion. So there wasn't kind of an official, if you want to give your life to Jesus, come up. So I was like, oh, phew, got away with that one. Well, not quite, but anyway. So at the time, you know, I was just a bit like, okay, like, obviously haven't made this commitment, but I came home from that for the first time actually really interested in the Bible, interested in God, sort of wanted to find out more. And over the next couple of years, mainly through the youth group, particularly this youth worker, and sort of we had a small group, or a cell group it was called, but, you know, kind of a small group of us, younger people that met during the week as well, and we spent time reading the Bible and praying for each other and that sort of thing. And it was in that context that I kind of became more and more interested in who God was and looking at it for myself. And then when I was 17, we in the Methodist Church, they do this thing called membership classes, where you become a member of the church or the Methodist Church, and you go through kind of a whole series of evenings, sort of training, I guess, for want of a better word, where you look at what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be part of a church. And then the idea is at the end of that period, so it was like 6 weeks, I think, there's then a service at which you're part of, and then you sort of officially become a member of the Methodist Church. And so I went through all of that and went to that service. And then for me, that point very much, so literally during that service, I made a commitment to Jesus that actually, for me, it wasn't about being part of the Methodist Church. It was actually, this is for me a marker that actually I want to give my life to Jesus, and I want him in my life. And so I literally can still remember where I was in the church, at the front, kneeling down, saying a prayer to Jesus that actually, I need you, I've messed up, I ask for your forgiveness, and I want you in my life, that sort of thing. And then the youth worker and the leader at the time then actually came and laid hands on me as well and prayed that I'd be filled with the Holy Spirit. So I can still just about remember the date, I think. I know I was 17. I know it was in March. It was either the 7th or the 8th. One of them is when I became a Christian. And then a year later, on the other day, I passed my driving test, but I can't... Well, actually, I could check my driving license probably and work that out. I can't remember which way round it is, but I know pretty much to the day when I became a Christian. But I hope what you will have gathered from the last 10 minutes of my story is actually, for me, it was very much a process. And so I'm kind of a bit of a weird mix, really, because and actually we'll do this in a minute, but if we went round the room, I'd imagine there's probably a mixture of, for some of you, your becoming a Christian was a very sudden, very dramatic experience. So, you may have been 1 minute not a Christian, and all of a sudden something happened, and in that instance you're like, wow, this is true, this is amazing, Jesus, I need you. And for you that was very dramatic and very instantaneous. Whereas I would argue for most of us probably, and I say we'll do this in a minute to see, but for most people, becoming a Christian is actually a journey, and that very much is what it was like for me. But unusually within that, I also have a date where I know that that's where I made that commitment and that decision. Whereas often, if becoming a Christian is a journey, you may not even know when you were saved. And we're going to look at what I mean when I say saved as we go through this talk. But for some of you, you may not even be able to say, well, it was this date, it was here, it was there. And so, just a quick show of hands. So if for you becoming a Christian was very much a really instantaneous, dramatic thing that you know where and when and how, you just put your hands up. Brilliant, thank you. So Scott and Callum, thank you, that's fantastic. And so for everyone else, if for you becoming a Christian was a very gradual process, it was over a period of time, if you put your hand up if that's the case for you. Okay, great. So, as thought, for most of us, it is kind of a journey. And I guess there's a few reasons why I sort of wanted to share all of that with you. And please, if you'd like to, you don't need to, please do ask me questions outside of this session about my story, or if there was something that really spoke to you or something you didn't really understand, then please do chat to me in the breaks or over the course of the year. I'm more than happy to chat further about that. But I guess a couple of the reasons I wanted to kind of share a bit about my story. First and foremost, I actually felt it was really important because over this week, you have all been incredibly brave, incredibly vulnerable. We are really grateful for how much you've already let us into your lives and your story. And I just really wanted to honour that by kind of sharing some of my story, because again, hopefully you'll have already seen this and picked this up, but we're not here to be up on a pedestal or to be set apart or think we're something special. Like, we want to journey with you and we want to share this year with you. So I just wanted to share a little bit about myself, and also, as I said, I think my story, I'm going to refer back to it quite a lot if I remember to, as we look at this topic of faith and salvation, because for me there's quite a few different elements that kind of God has revealed to me over that 17-year period before I became a Christian, and since then as well. So I'm 35 now, so I've been, and it's a funny one because I say for me it was a gradual thing, but I would definitely say I've been a Christian for 18 years. So although I grew up in church, although I believed in God, I guess, in some degree or another, I would very much talk in that language that I became a Christian when I was 17, even though before that I was exploring and, I was praying to God and that sort of thing. So in the preceding 18 years as well, since I made that commitment, I have certainly been on a journey and have certainly learnt a whole load more and realised a lot of the stuff that I thought I knew and thought was true actually probably isn't, and you're probably already discovering that on DNA and certainly will do over the course of the year, that actually perhaps some of the things that we cling to and some of the things that we think are true or really important perhaps aren't the be-all and end-all, and that's tough at times. So my journey over the last 18 years certainly hasn't always been easy, but it's certainly been worthwhile, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Like, I don't always find being a Christian easy. You may be shocked to hear someone say that who's on the DNA leadership team, but I don't. And the team know that. And I think it's fair to say, if we were all honest, we probably all have moments where we don't find it easy to follow God, or to believe that he loves us, or believes he wants the best for us, or whatever it is. So I am not going to stand here and pretend this is always easy, but my experience, and I don't always acknowledge it at the time, but most of the time I probably do, my experience is actually that God is good and he knows what he's doing. And as I say, I wouldn't change my last 18 years at all. So anyway, that is a bit about me. And so now I just want to we've got about an hour left, so I want to just spend a bit of time looking in a bit more detail as to what do we mean by faith and salvation. And one of the things that really frustrates me about church and about Christianity is how often we use jargon, like how often we just throw these words around, like salvation and saved and the blood of the Lamb and faith, and without even getting me started on what that might sound like or look like to a member of the public who has no idea of God. I think it's fair to say often as Christians we don't even know what half of these words really mean. You know, we can all talk about being saved and salvation and, you know, all sorts of things, but actually do we really know what that means, or do we just have an idea of, if you say this word saved, then you know, if someone's saved, does that just mean they're going to heaven? Because I'd imagine for some people that is the concept, that Christianity is all about being saved, and when you die you go up to some nice cloud and you spend eternity with God. But actually, what do we really mean when we say we're saved? So I'm going to unpack a bit of that for us. And before we do that, as I said, faith and salvation are intertwined and linked together. So I apologise that during the course of this talk I'm going to kind of jump between. So, you know, we're going to look at faith in a minute and then I'll look at salvation. But throughout all of that, you'll hear me kind of jumping around. So we'll talk about faith, but I'll bring salvation in and then we'll switch around. So please do try and stick with me on that. As I say, I think it's almost impossible and not helpful to try and separate them, but I apologise if that gets a bit confusing as we're going through this. So what I'd like you to do on just between you on your tables, just very quickly, is if you can just write down a definition of faith. So if I say this word faith, what does it mean? What does faith mean? Okay, if we draw that to a close, and we're just going to feed back, so we'll probably just hear from each table, if that's all right. So what does faith mean? Just shout out. Any answers, any ideas? Okay, thank you, Mark. So faith is a total belief in what you physically can't see. Yeah, thank you. Any other ideas, suggestions? What faith is? Yeah, trust in the unknown, yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, so trust in the unknown, as you say, kind of you can trust in things in the everyday. So the chair you're going to sit on, you trust is going to be safe. Probably 99.9 times out of 100, that will be true for a chair, definitely. Like that is normally the case, definitely. Any other definitions? Yeah. Okay, interesting. So faith is casting aside reasoning and rational thought. Okay, and can you explain that a bit more for me, Alex? So do you, by faith, are you talking about the Christian faith, so believing in God, or just faith in general, or what do you mean when you... Faith in general, okay. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 Okay, yeah, daring to believe. So there, is it fair to say that you're saying there's an element of the unknown, or as you say, you could walk over to that chair and you would sit on it because you have the faith that it's going to not break, but actually you don't know that, do you? Like, you can look at it and you think that chair looks like it's not broken, it looks like it's fine, but the element of faith is actually you don't know, do you? Someone could have tampered with that chair. You've never sat on that chair before. So is that what you're getting at with the kind of it not being rational and that sort of thing? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Elliot. And anything from the back table, Faith? Been covered. Yeah. Great. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Laurie. That's great. Yeah. So this idea that actually I guess in a way, we have a part to play in faith, in that you have to activate your faith, and it's all well and good sort of saying, I think that chair's safe to sit on, but unless you physically go and sit on it, there's no point you having that faith. It's meaningless. So, and we're going to come on to that a bit towards the end of the talk as well, looking at what does it mean to have faith, because it's all well and good to say we believe in God, we believe Jesus died for us, he loves us, but actually what does that look like? So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Laurie. So you're probably aware, you might not be, if you're not, it doesn't matter, that the Bible also gives a definition of faith, which is actually very similar to what's already been shared, really, which is great. So Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." I don't know if that's in your notes or not. I don't think it is. So jot the reference down if you want to. So it's Hebrews 11:1. "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." And obviously, you can look at that in two ways. I mean, that could apply to general faith, but obviously, particularly, this is looking at sort of faith in God and having a relationship with God in that context. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So there's kind of that weird paradigm, I believe is the correct word. Pete will be able to tell you better than I would. But that weird almost trade-off of the first part, which is faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So I want to say to you right here, right now, that if you are sitting here today or have been this week or at some point in your Christian life and you've doubted God, or you've doubted that he loves you, or you've doubted he knows what he's doing, or you've doubted that you're following the right path or you're where you're supposed to be, please don't think that means you don't have faith. It actually shows the complete opposite. The fact that you are doubting shows you have faith, in the sense that faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So unless at some point you kind of question things and you wrestle with things, it can't be faith. Because if the whole way through you are 100% certain, you adamant that it's all fine, that everything is as it should be, that's just certainty. That's not having faith in something you can't see, because there's no element of, oh, well, what if this isn't true? What if actually I've got it all wrong? And that's not to say that obviously you spend your whole life thinking like that, because that equally isn't very healthy. But please don't beat yourself up if you have questions, if you wrestle with things, actually that's how we learn and grow. And what's most important is how we work through that. So please don't just push all your doubts and your questions down. Please do talk to people about them and be open about them. And if you're not sure really whether God truly loves you or whether he likes you, talk to people about it. Look at the Bible, look what the Bible says, read books on it and explore it and wrestle with it, and be okay with actually that's part of your faith, that it is being sure of what we hope for, but certain of what we do not see. So there is an element of mystery and an unknown in it. So I want to encourage us all really over these next 11 months just to be open to wrestling with things and questioning things, and being open as well to having our opinions changed if needed. As I said, my view and experience of God is very different to what it was 18 years ago. Almost wholly for the positive. I've probably picked up a bit of baggage along the way as well for various different reasons. But on the whole, how I think about God and relate to Jesus and the things that I believe are true are much more mature and developed and advanced than they were when I first kind of learnt about it all. So do be open to going on a journey with that. So we've looked a little bit about what faith is. I'm going to read a Bible passage to you, which the reference is on your notes, but not the passage. So it's Ephesians 2:8, and I'm just going to read what that says. So Ephesians 2:8 says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God." So I'll read that again. "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God." Actually, I think it's on here. There we go. Now, you may read that and you may think, brilliant, that all makes sense to me. That's absolutely fine. Not got any problems with that. I understand exactly what it's saying and exactly what it means. If you're anything like me, you might be thinking, what? So it's by grace you have been saved through faith. So within that, there's obviously three things it's talking about. So grace, saved, and faith. So straight away, there's an assumption that we know what those words mean. I haven't got time to explain in detail at all what they mean, so please do chat with me or DNA2 or the team at the end of this session or throughout this week if you have questions on what they mean. So it's talking about these three different words, and it's saying it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And as I say, for me, I think that it's quite a complicated statement. You may be sitting there not having any problems with that at all, and that's great if that's the case. What I'd like to do is try and do a visual demonstration of what that's trying to say. So I need a volunteer, please, if you want to put your hand up if you'd like to volunteer. Thank you, Alice. That was the first time. You can take a seat. Thank you, Alice. So Mark, if you open your present, please, and then if you could show us what it is. Yeah, okay. Open out. What does it sound at? Wholeness. Okay, great. Thank you. So that's your gift, Mark. And if you'd like to come up and grab another envelope, please, Mark, and then you can give that to someone else in the room. So Alice has got faith. Mark has got wholeness. Thank you. So anyone you like. Elliot. So if you do the same, if you could open your envelope, please. Okay, so Elliot, you've got identity. Brilliant. If you'd like to do the same, please, there's another envelope. There's two, actually. So if you could take an envelope and give it to someone else, please. Thank you. So Callum, what have you got? Callum's got life to the full. Brilliant. So Callum, if you'd like to come up and take the final envelope, please, to someone. Okay, so David's got another present, so if you open yours, please. Freedoms. David's got freedom. Brilliant. It's not bad. Brilliant. And if you could come up, David, and there's a smaller box, if you could give that to someone else, please. It is, yeah, it is, to be fair. It's quite big. So who's going to get the final present? Brilliant. So, Helen, if you could open that box, please, and tell us what's inside. Salvation, thank you. So Helen has got salvation. Fantastic. So the purpose of that exercise basically was Helen is saved. Brilliant. You're sorted. The rest of us, unfortunately, are a bit stuffed because we haven't got salvation. That was obviously just a joke. So the reason I kind of did this exercise was, as it says, it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And what I want us to look at now is actually what do we mean when we say this word, you are saved? What does that actually mean? And, you know, that's related to salvation. It's kind of one of the same words in a sense. Does anyone have any ideas? So if I say, you know, we are saved, what do we think we mean when we say that? Brilliant, thank you, Laurie. So, physically removed from a place of peril. Yeah, any other ideas when we talk about saved? Yeah. 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 So, yeah. Perish, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, great, thank you. So, yeah, go on, Mark. No, go. Yeah. 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 Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So, go on, was that one hand? Yeah, yeah. Great, yeah, thank you. Yes, if you, from a sort of practical side of things, if you save something on a computer, that idea of you're saving something to a safe place, you're putting it somewhere else. So, all brilliant answers, and I think, do shout at me if I'm wrong, but I would say all four of those very much, and rightly so, completely rightly so. The element involved is about being saved from some sort of disaster or eternal punishment or eternal death. This idea of being protected, being kept safe from some sort of judgment or punishment. Is that fair to say that was the idea behind it? Which, as I say, is all correct, is all fantastic. Before I expand on that, the other elements of kind of this faith salvation box I've just given out is obviously the reason that the first box was faith was actually in order to get to the salvation which Helen got, someone first had to receive the box. So when I said, can I have a volunteer, if all of you had kept your hands down and said, no, I'm not interested, I don't know what I'm volunteering for, I don't want to be involved, I would have had to have just left that box here. No one would have been able to receive that salvation. So this idea of it is by grace you have been saved through faith, although it isn't faith that saves us, because it's quite clear that it is grace that saves us, and that's the element, because it's Jesus that has died for us and rose again, and it's all about God, it's all about what Jesus has done for us. we still need to have that element of faith to receive it. So does that make sense? So Alice, when she came up, received that box, and so her gift on there was faith. And in doing that, we then passed it around the room just because I, wanted everyone to be included. But if Alice had just stood there and unpacked the whole box, she would have received that salvation. But so I guess it's a long-winded way of saying salvation is a gift from God to us, but we have to still receive that. So God is offering it to everyone in the world, but people still have to choose to receive that. And the way they do that is through faith, because actually, as we all know, we can't physically see God. He's not over sat on that chair. We have to have that step of faith that actually this is true, that Jesus did die for us, he did rise again, and that he has saved us from this eternal punishment, from destruction, from peril. The reason why there are other elements within that say Mark got wholeness, was it? Did you get wholeness? Elliot got identity, Callum got life to the full, and David got freedom. The reason I've put those in, because what I want to look at now is I would like us to explore actually that I think salvation is so much more than just being saved from this peril. As I say, it's completely right that we talk about that, because we are saved from eternal punishment. We are saved from a life without God, which is worth celebrating in itself. But actually, I think salvation, and I only think this because that's what the Bible says, it's not me making this up, is about so much more than that. And this is probably one of the biggest shifts I've had actually in my theology, in my understanding. So very much growing up, and very much when I became a Christian, a lot of the emphasis was about not going to hell. So a lot of the reason you would encourage someone to become a Christian was so you could go to heaven when you died, and so you could have eternal life, which of course is fantastic. It's not a bad reason to want to become a Christian, but more and more I am realising that actually salvation is about so much more than that. And without wanting to be heretical, the whole eternal life thing is actually a really tiny piece of salvation, because Jesus cares about the here and now as well. That actually he wants us to have life to the full. He wants us to know our true identity as sons and daughters of God. He wants us to be whole. He wants us to be free. And yes, ultimately in heaven, that's where that will happen in its fullness. But Jesus came and died and rose again so that we could have that now. And you may already be living in that. You may already know that. And if you do, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But if you don't, my hope would be what you take from today is actually Jesus, God the Father, however you want to term him, cares about you right here, right now. And he cares about your life now. Because actually, when he came to save you, he came to save you from that moment that you met him, that moment that you turned to him. So you can have wholeness, so you can have freedom, so you can have life to the full, you can have identity, healing, all sorts of other things rolled into that. And actually that's what Christianity is really about, kind of living that in the here and now. First and foremost for ourselves, because we need to know it, but once we know it, to then give that away as well to the world around us. That actually, as you probably know, God wants to break through in the here and now, which is why he wants us to pray for healing, which is why he wants us to care for the sick, for the lost, the least. And actually that's part of what you're called to now. And so yeah, I hope that's helpful. I hope that's encouraging. I hope that's exciting. As I say, there is the eternal life element as well. So please don't hear what I'm not saying. Want a better way of quoting Pete. So yeah, I'm not saying that's not important, and I'm not saying that's not necessary, because actually, unless we accept Jesus, there is that eternal punishment. And again, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of what hell is or isn't, or what it looks like. That's far too big a can of worms for me to open. You will have sessions on that later in the year. Although again, really helpfully, you probably won't get given a definitive answer. You'll just get the tools to unpack actually what it means when we talk about eternal life and heaven and hell and that sort of thing. So definitely that is a part of salvation, and don't ever forget that or diminish that, but live in the fullness of it here and now as well. On your notes towards the bottom, I'm not going to talk about this now. I've kind of vaguely covered some of these, but it just looks, so there's a couple of Bible passages for you to look at if you'd like to. So the first one is what is meant by salvation, and it talks about God saves the lost, saves those that are dead. So again, it's this saving someone from peril, bringing them to safe land. Something I will just pick up on actually, Luke 15, for those among you that may have noticed, that is the passage that Guy spoke about in the Father Heart of God. And again, this is something that has probably only come to me in maybe the last 5 years at most. So that is one of my favourite Bible passages, the prodigal son. It's something that God has really spoken to me about over many years now. But something I realised only fairly recently is that actually I spent years and years thinking about that parable as it's all about people that don't know God, who've gone away, or who are the elder son who stayed at home but actually don't really know God, and they're kind of just living by rules and regulations. And then the whole point of the story is they then find the father and he invites them in. And as I say, like more recently, God gave me a real revelation about it, that actually both the youngest son and the eldest son are both sons. They are already part of the family. So their identity is already secure. I guess in terms of the language we're talking about now, their salvation is already secure. But how they operate on a day-to-day relational basis is not correct. And again, like in the last 5 years, one of the biggest things that I'm learning is that Christianity is all about a relation. Obviously, I knew it was all about a relationship before then, but it's really all about a relationship. And actually, day to day, all Jesus cares about is how are we relating to him? Are we intimate with him? Do we know his love? Are we receiving that intimacy? And the real lesson I got from the prodigal son is actually, and this is just my thoughts, I believe they are theologically correct, but don't hang me up on them if they're not. For me, the point of the prodigal son, or one of the points of the prodigal son, is actually as soon as you turn to Jesus, you are saved. Like, your eternal destiny is secure. And personally, I believe that can't change purely because you are saved by grace through faith. So the whole point of being saved by grace is there's nothing you can do to earn your salvation. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. But equally, there's nothing you can do to make him love you less. There's no sin you can commit. There's no wanderings you can go on that can stop him loving you. And as you all probably know, there's a range of theological views on salvation and whether you can lose your salvation or not and what that looks like. And as I'm not going to go into that now because, one, I don't have the theological training to be able to understand that. And also I don't have the time to do that now because that's a very big argument. But what I understand from God and what I understand from the prodigal son is once you have given your life to Jesus, that's it, because you are saved by grace. But what can change and what does change is how you relate to him on a day-to-day basis. So you could be 100% saved, but as far away from God as anyone, because you're off in the far lands partying and blowing all your money and getting drunk and doing this, that and the other. Or equally, you could be saved and living right next to Jesus, but because you're so caught up in you've got to do the right thing, you've got to do everything perfectly, you've got to do everything exactly right, you're not enjoying that relationship because you're missing the point, to be blunt. And so very much I'm more and more learning that a lot about salvation is how do we relate to Jesus on a day-to-day basis? Are we growing in intimacy with him, or are we growing away from him? Are we choosing to live life our own way? That was kind of a little aside, but I hope that's helpful. Then towards the end of the notes, it talks about what we save from. So without using these words, we've kind of talked around some of these things. So as well as the wholeness, living life to the full, that sort of thing, we're saved from illness, enemies, death, sin and its consequences. So again, they're all listed in the Bible. And then another thing which we probably don't perhaps think about as much or talk about as much is not only are we saved from things, we're actually saved to things. And I hadn't come across this until I started teaching this session. And these notes I'm very grateful to my predecessor, a guy called Tim Raines. He sort of did all the groundwork for the notes. I've since, obviously, in terms of teaching the session, is very much my own, but the notes I really want to honour and thank Tim because they are his. But one of the things I hadn't realised is this passage, we won't look at it now, but Psalm 53:6 says you are brought into the blessings of God. And what a fantastic thing to think about, that actually you are saved so that God can bring you into his blessings. And I don't want us to go off on the wrong route and that and think I'm talking about the prosperity gospel, because I'm not. But actually, God's heart is to bless you. And maybe for some of you, this year is about learning to receive God's blessing and his kindness. And I know through having the privilege of chatting to some of you already, and I won't name you by name, please do feel free to share with the rest of the group later if you haven't done already. I know some of you, even in the build-up to coming on DNA financially, have been phenomenally blessed, beyond your expectations, beyond where you thought money could come from. And that's just one of the ways that God can bless us. And as I say, don't take that to the extreme, thinking that God's going to give you everything you want and this massive mansion and loads of money and loads of fast cars. But actually, his heart is to bless. And particularly if you look in the Old Testament, time and time again, when it talks about Israel living as they were supposed to, it talks about phenomenal blessing. And again, that's not a result, sort of if they do the right thing, then they might earn God's blessing. It's because his heart is to bless. And they were in a position that they were able to receive that. So do be asking for that this year. Ask God to bless you, whatever that looks like for you. Ask your discipler to help pray into that for you. And then right at the bottom of the page, it talks about we are saved for as well. So again, this is probably something we don't necessarily talk about, particularly if we focus on the whole heaven and hell thing. We probably don't get to the point of we're actually saved for something as well. So saved for is also a strong emphasis in the Bible, that we are saved for something. Each of us have a destiny. And I really want to remind you, if you've forgotten, of what Guy prophesied over you as a group on Monday night. Just the potential that is in this room is phenomenal, and just the destiny that God has for each one of you individually, but also as a group during this year, is amazing. So do be actively seeking that as you go throughout your year. Encourage each other in that. Be chatting to each other about, well, what dreams has God given you for your future? What is it that God wants you to start up? And Joy, something that I loved, which you may not have even clocked that you said, was when you and Helen did the fantastic dance last night. You said, one of the reasons I want to learn this language is so I can go back to my culture and, I don't know your exact words, but essentially bless them and serve them by being a doctor in that community. Like, what an amazing thing to want to do. And that's not just to single you out, Joy. You've all got things that God has given you. To be feeding that in each other this year, be asking each other, be chatting to Joy, saying, how's that going? Are you learning that language? What are you doing to kind of help make that happen? Because as you all know, it's all about God, but we need to play our part. We need to be active in that. We need to be encouraging each other. So let's be looking at what our destiny is in God. And as I say, I'm speaking to myself as much as you. I don't do that enough. So let's flick over the page. Page 26. So again, that just a few more Bible passages looking at what it is we are saved for. So one of my favourite bits in Ephesians 2:10 talks about for being saved for good works, and this idea of actually God has saved each one of us for good works that he's already planned for us. So he has things that he wants each of us to do. But that's from a place of love and knowing his love, not from a place of striving or trying to earn that love. So in the middle of that page, I'm just very, very briefly going to flick through some of the different words associated with salvation, what's involved in it, what does it look like. Again, I've already mentioned sort of jargon words or words we don't perhaps understand. Certainly for me, a lot of those words listed under the heading what is involved in salvation, a lot of those are quite big words. They're not words I normally use in my everyday life, so they're not necessarily words I particularly understand, but just looking at what the Bible means by them. So in salvation there is this thing called atonement. So when Jesus died for us and when he rose again, part of that is atonement, and what that means in the Old Testament was it's a word to cover, but not in the sense of covering up, but more in the sense of being covered like by insurance. So for example, if one of us sort of came in and threw a bottle of red wine on the floor here, it would obviously make quite a big stain. Hopefully Dalesdown would be insured, and hopefully they'd be able to get that claim. So there's some crazy DNA team member that threw a bottle of wine down and they've ruined our carpet, and can you come and sort it? And actually this idea that stain is being covered up, if you've got insurance, you'd come and have it replaced, and kind of that idea of what was there, that horrible stain has now been covered, it's been dealt with. Next one is reconciliation. To thoroughly change from I can't even say that word. Enmity. Is that even how you say it? Thank you. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, being an enemy of someone to friendship. And again, the Bible talks about this, that actually before we were saved, we were enemies of God. And that's, I don't know about you, but for me, that's quite sort of a strong word. I don't really like thinking about that element, that actually I was once an enemy of God, but that's the reality. But now, because of what Jesus has done, we can be friends. We can have friendship with Jesus. Next one, redemption. And again, I think this one loses a lot in our current culture, because although we have horrendous modern slavery, it's not what it used to. In terms of slavery, it works in a very different way nowadays to what it did in Jesus' time. So back in that day, you would literally have a slave that was known as a slave, and everyone knew that, whereas obviously nowadays it's much more kind of underground and human trafficking and all that sort of thing. Whereas in that day you would kind of have a slave, and they would have to do, they'd have to do what you said, they'd be with you unless someone redeemed them. And that word redemption is literally all about someone paying the price to set that slave free. So back in that culture, if someone came to the slave master and said, actually, that person's mine, I want to set them free, they could do if they gave a certain payment, financial payment. Whereas obviously what Jesus gave was so much greater. He literally said to each one of you, you're mine. Jack, you're mine. Daniel, you're mine. I want you. And he knew, because of how the enemy works, because of how the world works, because of how life works, he knew the only way he could pay for you was if he gave his life. And so actually that idea of being redeemed by Jesus because he gave everything for you. Regeneration. So the Bible talks about new birth and new creation. It literally says that once we've let Jesus into our lives, we're a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. And now, as we all know, on a day-to-day basis, we may still see elements of the old part of us in terms of our character and how we think and behave. But actually, the reality is we are a new creation. Justification is all about God's action in pronouncing sinners' righteousness. So again, that idea of being right with God, that actually we're now in right standing with him. Adoption, again, kind of links a bit to the redemption one, but actually we are chosen into his family. And the really amazing element of adoption and being chosen into his family is actually he, as it says, he chose us. He wants us as part of his family. And then last one, sanctification. The continuing work of God in the life of the believer. So as we all know, life doesn't just get sorted when we become a Christian. Actually, it often gets a whole lot harder. And Jesus even says it does. You know, we're not being lied to here, or it's not pulling any punches. He literally tells us life will get harder by becoming a Christian. So if life's tough at times, don't be surprised, because Jesus said it would be. Because we live in a world, but sanctifying us. And what that means is day by day, if we let him, he is making us more like the people he always created us to be, more like Jesus. So as I've literally unpacked all those words very briefly. Do look over them yourself. Do look up the Bible verses, look around what the words mean, and really just feed on the truths of what they're saying. Right, where are we going with the PowerPoint? Let's see. What is salvation? Yeah, there's a rubber ring. Good. There we go. So what you said earlier, Laurie, actually about a person is delivered, saved from some danger, real or potential. Talked about what we're saved from, what we're saved to, and what we're saved for. And then we've gone through all the associated words. Right, so we've only got 15 minutes left, so I'm just going to very quickly flick through the last bits. There is an exercise at the bottom of your notes. We're not going to have time to do that, unfortunately, so please do that in your own time. I'm just going to explain what it's looking at, and I think we've kind of covered this anyway, hopefully, or I've certainly covered it. Hopefully you've understood what I've meant by it. I apologise if you haven't. But essentially it is this idea of salvation is a journey. And the Bible talks about salvation in kind of three different contexts. So we are saved, we were saved, and we will be saved. And these Bible passages each have a different emphasis. So in your own time, if you look at the different Bible verses, one of them, unfortunately, did have a typo. Hopefully I've changed that, but I might not have done. So I apologise if you look at one of them and you're like, this doesn't make any sense at all. It's got nothing to do with being saved. Just ignore it. That one's the typo. Hopefully I have changed it now, but I can't remember, I'm afraid. But the exercise essentially is to look at each Bible passage and then put it under the heading, is it we are saved, we are being saved, or we shall be saved? And really helpfully, Laurie actually gave the illustration earlier of someone who's on a boat, kind of if you're in danger out on the open seas, and then someone comes and saves them from peril. So this idea of we are saved, we were saved, we will be saved. If someone's sinking on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and a lifeboat comes out to them, and they're literally in the sea. Someone throws a ring around them, so they're still in the Atlantic Ocean, which I'm assuming is freezing cold. I imagine it would be. Choppy waves, middle of nowhere, but they've now got this life ring around them. Is that person now saved? What do you think? Shout out your answers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Brilliant answer. Thanks, Alice. So that idea that they're on their way to it, and they know now that there is a way they can be safe, but they're still in the middle of the ocean. It's not quite happened yet. Does anyone think they, at that instant, they're safe? Everything's all sorted. It's all fine. Good. No, because they are still in the middle of the Atlantic. So they get. Well, exactly. You never know. So the lifeboat approaches beside them, pulls them on board, gives them one of those amazing aluminium jackets, gives them a cup of tea. So they're on the boat, but they are still in the middle of the Atlantic. They're on the edge of hypothermia, had a few cuts and bruises. At that point, are they saved? Are they safe? Yeah, so yeah, indeed. Yeah, exactly. So they're not quite out of the water yet, but their chances of surviving have massively increased. You would hope they would now be safe. And so the boat comes into shore, the ambulance is waiting for them, get checked out, they're all absolutely fine, they get the all clear, and they go off home. Are they now saved at that point? Thank you, Alice. Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you. So Alice said from the Atlantic Ocean, and Daniel said a car could come, I think. So yeah, for that illustration alone, they are now safe. As we all know, anything could happen in life, so there's still a little bit shaky ground. But hopefully you'll have realised the point of that is actually this whole we are saved, we were saved, we will be saved. Because when we give our lives to Jesus, literally something changes about our eternal destiny. But we all know there's a life to live between that. So do look into those verses, do unpack them. I've got another page of notes. Oops. So the last 10 minutes, we're just going to look a very little bit about faith. And again, we're not going to have time to go into this in too much detail, so do please go back over the notes. Do ask me questions if you have any questions. But essentially, there's different things involved in faith. So as it says at the top of the notes, faith in the New Testament is rarely a noun. It is usually a verb. That is, believing, not simply a belief. True faith leads to action, and that's what it says in James 2. And there's this fantastic story, which is true, I believe, definitely is true, of a French daredevil artist almost. He did these extreme stunts and all that sort of thing. I can't remember his exact name, but yes, I think was it Blondin? Was that? Yeah, thank you. I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. It may well be. I don't know. But this particular incident was he was like a tightrope walker and that sort of thing. And sorry, did you have a question? Okay. Cool. Anyway, I may have the wrong person. I don't know. But anyway, there was this person who used to go over tight ropes, and there was one on the Niagara Falls. So massive tightrope, and there's massive crowds gathered to watch him. And he literally walked on this tightrope from one side of the Niagara Falls to the other side and back again, I believe. And the crowd went wild. They're like, wow, you're so good. This is amazing. Like, yeah, whoa. And he's like, yeah, brilliant. That was easy. It's nothing. He said, who believes I can go across, do the same thing with someone in a wheelbarrow? And the crowd out, yeah, you can definitely do it. You're the best. You're amazing. Yes. Go for it. He's, oh, thank you. That's brilliant. Okay. Who wants to get in the wheelbarrow? Deadly silence. No one answers. I don't know what then happened, actually. To be fair, I probably need to look into it. Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, his mum. Oh, that's even better. Okay, apparently his mum. Did he do it? Or yeah. Wow. What a story. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, so there are other wonderful artists as well. But anyway, the point of that, as I expect you've probably gathered, is sometimes faith is like that. That we can spend our days saying, "Yeah, God, I really believe you love me. I think you're fantastic. You really love me," and then sometimes He turns around and just says, "Okay, now live in it. Now live like I love you." And that's when it's like, who's going to get in the wheelbarrow? Faith isn't always easy. I'm not going to pretend it is, but it's always good. There's that amazing quote in, I don't know, who's seen The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? Narnia film? If you haven't, I'd recommend watching it. It's a great film. Really great books as well. And there's this line in the end, so there's the whole thing about Aslan, this massive lion who's the god figure. And one of the children, Lucy, at the end of the film, they're chatting and they're like, "Oh, do you think he'll ever come back?" Blah, blah, blah. And essentially she sort of says, she sort of said, "Oh, but he's not safe or something." And the beaver, I think it is, she's talking to. I really need to brush up on my stories before I tell them because they don't really work otherwise. But anyway, I think she's talking to a beaver and sort of says, "Oh, but he's not safe." And he's like, "Not tame, thank you, he's not tame." But yeah, that was it, because he was going, he kind of goes where he wants, when he wants, the lion figure. And he disappeared again, and she's like, "But he's not tame." And the beaver just laughs. It's like, of course he's not. He's a wild lion. Like, he's dangerous, but he is good, is it? Or safe? So anyway, I'll brush up on it next time. But, faith isn't always easy. And God will ask you to take risks and will ask you to trust him. So it's not always going to be easy, but he is good and he loves you. And so when it gets tough, remember those things, because those don't change, even when it is tough, even when it's scary. Very quickly then, acts of faith have 3 steps. The objective facts, the mind. So something that's really important actually during this year is, I didn't do these slides. Again, this was my predecessor, who I'm very grateful for. I'm not quite sure what that shows really, but there we go. The steps, I guess, steps of faith. So when you're on DNA, please don't switch off your mind. We're not asking you to go through this year and just say yes, 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 yes to everything. We want you to wrestle. We want you to question. Like, the Christian faith is built on truth. So we need to know what that truth is. Like, being a Christian doesn't mean you just switch off common sense and reality. Actually, you switch into it. It's just the real reality. So do engage your mind. But equally, it's subjective. Like, a relationship with God, if it's live and real and dynamic, involves your heart as well. It involves your feelings and emotions. And again, that doesn't mean you trust all of your feelings. That doesn't mean you live your life by your feelings. But it does mean we want all of you to experience God's love. Like, we don't just want that to be a head thing. We want that to permeate your whole being as well. We want you to feel God's love. That doesn't mean you're always going to feel it, but we want you to have those encounters and for that to become more and more of your experience. So do expect to to feel emotions and to feel God's love and his presence as well. And then probably the most difficult thing is the active. What am I going to do? My will. Ultimately, faith involves a choice. Alice chose to volunteer and receive that box. We can choose whether we want to live by our feelings or not. As like when they're negative feelings, we can choose whether we want to believe that or not. Or we can say, actually, I have the faith that Jesus does love me, even though I don't feel it today because I'm having a rubbish day. Like, that's what it means by being active about your faith. So, how do you activate your faith? Is it as simple as finding the magic faith switch and just flicking it and then everything's fine? Of course it's not. Life isn't like that. So under how to develop faith, very, very quickly, I'm just going to flick through the headings. Most importantly, know who we have faith in. I think often we can talk a lot about I don't have enough faith, or how do I grow in faith, or do I have enough faith to see this person healed? For me, what's most important is who is your faith in, not how much do you have. Jesus talks about having faith the size of a mustard seed. And whenever I struggle, which happens, I struggle quite a lot sometimes, the thing I really cling to is that Jesus talks about if you have faith the size of a mustard seed. I don't know if you've ever seen a mustard seed. You probably, when you're at school, planted one in a little cotton wool thing and put some water in it and that sort of thing. They're literally tiny. Go and buy a mustard seed if you've never seen one. They're minuscule, and I think even I on my bad days can have faith that size. So if you have faith in Jesus, that's that size, it's much better than having a massive faith in something that's not Jesus. So who is your faith in? And know, if you're doubting God or you're doubting he loves you, look at the Bible, learn more about him. Activate your faith. So like any muscle in your body, you have to use it, you have to train it, you have to activate it. So faith is like a muscle. The more you step out in faith, the easier it becomes. It doesn't mean it's easy, but the easier it becomes. The more you get used to it, the more it stretches. So how do you exercise faith? Again, there's a few different things. So hear his voice, get his heart. The biggest way you can grow in your faith this year is to spend time with Jesus. Learn more about him. Learn how to hear from him. Learn his heart for you. Know that he has plans and purposes for you, that you're living in those. Be around the right sort of people as well. We all know that some people can really build faith and grow faith, whereas others can kind of really suck that out of you. They can be really cynical. They can be really just negative all the time, and that's going to chip away. In fact, of course, at times it's, you need to spend time with people like that because they might be your friends or you get alongside them, but don't wrap your whole life around them. They're just chipping away at your faith the whole time. And then it talks about testing of your faith. And, God will often allow us to be in positions where we need to trust him. As I've said many a time, hopefully you've realised now, it isn't always easy. Life, just in general, take away the Christian bit, life isn't always easy. But, trusting in God isn't always easy. So to help us grow and develop and trust in him, he will allow us at times to be in situations where we need to trust in him. So be open to that. Be open to leaning into him in those times. And it talks a lot in the Bible about if you can be faithful in the small, God knows you will be faithful in the big. So don't despise the small beginnings. Start small. Start trusting God to provide you with that £10 you need to buy your next meal or whatever it is, or trust God to give you the energy to write your first worksheet or to understand what it is God's saying to you through it. And then as you trust him in the small things, you'll see him increase in the big things, and he'll be able to trust you with the bigger things. Learn from others. The beauty of being part of God's family is you don't have to do it on your own. You can learn from other people's experience and other people's lessons. So learn as much as you can from other people as well. You can't do it all on your own. And then very, very quickly, because we are pretty much run out of time, hindrances to faith. As we all know, there are certain things that can really push against our faith, that can really make it more difficult for us to trust in God. First and foremost, again, Guy talked about this on Tuesday, having the wrong image of God is a massive hindrance to faith. How can we trust someone if we don't actually know what they like? If we don't think God is a loving Father who wants the best for us and who knows us, it's going to be difficult to trust him. So work on that side of your relationship with God if that's where you're at. Unbelief, a lack of humility and openness. Of course, that can impinge on faith as well. And then just flicking over to the final page, I think it's fair to say, and it would be interesting to, not now, I haven't got time, but to chat to Joy about this and get Joy's understanding as well. Our Western mindset is a big barrier sometimes to faith. Nowadays, if you've got a headache or if you're ill, where do we turn? And I'm not saying that's wrong, but where do we turn? Sorry? WebMD, medication. Exactly. We turn to medicine rather than prayer. And I'm not saying medicine's wrong at all, but it's worth thinking, why don't we just pray that God will heal them? And please don't hear what I'm not saying. Medication is God-given and he works through that. And often it's a combination of medication and prayer. So please don't stop taking medication unless you have been healed and proved so by a doctor. But it's worth considering in terms of our mindset and what we think. And then last one, fear can be a massive barrier to faith. I know in my own life that has been and still is. Not as much as it was, but it certainly still is. I'm going to finish with a final quote, which says, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing it while still afraid." And if that doesn't challenge you, then I don't know what will. I've run out of time. I've actually run over slightly, so I do apologise. I'm going to end there. But if you've got any questions, do come and chat to me afterwards. Thank you.